Andrew Grill is a practical futurist and former global managing partner at IBM. Andrew believes that to get digital, you need to be digital. He is a popular, sought-after keynote speaker and board-level technology advisor. Some futurists paint a picture of the future in 10, 20, or even 50 years, whereas Andrew delivers practical and immediately actionable insights on how to achieve corporate goals on a global and long-lasting scale. We're really looking forward to your questions on this one, so be sure to post your questions in the stage chat throughout Andrew's talk. And with that, I'd like to invite Andrew onto the stage with me. Hello, Andrew. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Hi, Zoe. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. I love your background. Beautiful Lincoln Cathedral there.
Indeed.
I'll hand the stage over to you. Thank you very much. We'll be back for questions.
Well, thank you so much, Zoe, and it's great to be here. You may have heard that I've worked for some large brands and large companies, but don't let that fool you. I'm very, very cognizant of SMEs and what they need to do and the challenges that you face. I grew up in a small and medium business family, so I had discussions around the kitchen table, the dinner table, about how difficult it is to run a small business. I've also run 6 of my own high-tech startups over a 12-year period, both in Australia and the UK. So I know what it's like to run a small business. I know the challenges, I know the highs and the lows. So hopefully we'll be able to be very, very conscious of your industries as we talk this morning. But I wanted to ask you all one simple question, and that is, are you digitally curious? I'm going to do it through a series of 6 questions that you can self-assess whether you're really digitally curious, and that'll become a bit more evident as we go through the presentation this afternoon. And the first question I want to ask is, are you on LinkedIn? Now, I'm sure the answer is yes, you are all on LinkedIn because that's where business gets done. And we'll talk a bit later on about how you can really let LinkedIn sing for you and your business. So that was an easy one. Question 2, have you Googled yourself lately? Now, not just Googled yourself with your name, but also your company. And we'll spend a bit of time a bit later on talking about your digital first impression, because frankly, when someone reads about you or your company, what are they going to do? They're going to put your name or your company name into Google to see what comes up. Question 3, do you consume all of your newspapers and magazines digitally? This photograph's an interesting one. It was taken in April 2010 in Sydney, Australia. I just bought my first iPad on a trip back home to visit my family, and I was in a cafe, and the gentleman next to me was reading this paper version of what I saw on my iPad. I thought it was quite strange, but that was 10 years ago. Question 4, do you bank with an app-only bank like a Monzo or a Revolut or an N26? The answer might be no, but often when I go into a Starbucks and I see someone put down the pink Monzo card, I wonder to myself, why have they decided to change banks? And it may not be that you're in the financial industry, but it's always good to see how other competitive services are being used by consumers. Famously, the CEO of Ford some years ago was asked what sort of car he drove. And he said, well, I actually drive a different car every week. I drive one of my competitors' vehicles to get to understand what it is that they do really, really well. So the other reason why you should be looking at these digital services is if, as everything is moving online and going more digital, people have different ways of paying for things, and you should be aware of how these services are developing. Second last question, this is an important one. Do you secure all of your social media channels with 2-factor authentication? Now, you'll be used to 2-factor because if you bank with any of the major banks, they will give you a token or a dongle, or maybe have an app where you have to enter a random 6-digit number to access your financial information. So the question would be, if you treat your money with a high level of security because your bank makes you, why wouldn't you treat your data and your customer data with a high level as well? So as cybersecurity is becoming more and more important and cyber attacks are becoming more prevalent for businesses of all sizes, you should start to secure your own social media channels. Give you a quick example. Someone hacks into your Gmail, and in your Gmail somewhere is a list of all the passwords in a spreadsheet that someone has thankfully sent you. Your business is then at risk. So think about that as well. And final question, have you bought some Bitcoin? Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment you buy Bitcoin to get rich. In the news this week, it's trending up again. But a couple of years ago, when Bitcoin was at its peak, I bought £20 worth of Bitcoin, not to get rich. I was hearing all about this new technology. I wanted to know what it was and why people were talking about it. So I bought £20 worth, and I found that it actually took 2 banks and 4 weeks to convert it back into pounds. So I realized that it wasn't ready for prime time. So by doing these things, you can be very, very keen to understand the new technologies. So those 6 questions that I asked you, some of them are easy and some of you might be doing them already. And some of them you might say, I haven't really investigated that. I want to get you to a point where you are very digitally curious, where new terminology, new technology is thrown at you and you go, I want to learn more about that, because as we've seen this year, we've had a lot of disruption. And for the last 5 or so years, a lot of my talks have been around disruption. And before this year, disruption came from digital disruption. It came from other entrants and other competitors. But now we've had global massive disruption. But I see disruption as an opportunity for change. And if we learn nothing from this dreadful pandemic and we don't change the way we work, the way we go to market, then we've lost a huge opportunity. Because over the last 8 months, it's just accelerated absolutely everything. The last time I was back on a real stage, I was at the top of the gherkin in London back in January, speaking to a law firm and their clients. And they'd asked me to give a view of what I thought as a futurist the next decade would look like. And many of the things that I'll talk about this afternoon, I said might happen in 2, 3, or 4 years. They ended up happening in 2 or 3, 4 months. There's a great quote from the CEO of the National Australia Bank, Ross McEwen, who said, COVID sped up the digital banking revolution in 10 weeks, not 5 years. And this is where the opportunity comes from. Because we've had to work from home, because we haven't been able to open some of our stores, we've had to move pretty much everything online. And so while back in January, I said some of these things might happen in the future, they've already happened. So you have a massive opportunity. There are now no longer roadblocks to consumers and B2B clients wanting to deal with you in a digital way. And you should really, really harness that. Now, thankfully, a few months ago, McKinsey did some research. They basically looked at 3,600 global decision makers in 11 countries across 12 sectors and 14 spend categories. And what we're talking about could be equally relevant to B2C. So the fact that it's B2B, don't think it doesn't apply if you're a B2C business. But what they saw was there were 3 key themes coming out of the way people were consuming sales and marketing material. First of all, with spend, while companies were generally reducing spend, a sizable number were increasing it. That's good news. It's a good opportunity for you. In terms of digital, they found that digital interactions were 3 times more important to customers than traditional sales transactions. Now you think about it, if you're being sold to, someone comes into the office, you give them a cup of tea, glass of water, you sit down, you do pleasantries, and 5 or 10 minutes into the sales pitch, you realize this just isn't for you. But because we're nice people, you have to humor them, and the next 45 minutes is a wasted opportunity. I think why consumers and B2B decision makers are finding digital as a more effective and efficient way of doing business is they can cut through very quickly. And back to my discussion about LinkedIn and your digital first impression, they can actually look at you and your business even before they even touch you for the very first time. That's why digital has become so much more important during the pandemic. The final theme from the report was that, yes, everything has gone remote. 90% of things are now on video or web sales. But interestingly, 50% of those surveyed thought this was equally or more effective. Back to my point before, they actually liked this way of being sold to and marketed to. So it's an opportunity that we shouldn't think, yes, we're going to have some vaccines, we're going to have the restrictions lifted maybe into next year in different parts of the country, everything will go back to normal. No, no, no. Digital is here to stay. The research backs it up, and the customer feedback and the way they're behaving also backs this up. And there were some really interesting quotes from this report, and I wanted to use them because they will help frame our discussion this afternoon. 76% of companies said they were very or somewhat likely to sustain these shifts 12 months post-COVID. They like the way that digital is helping them run their businesses. It's more efficient. So you should assume that this is going to continue even into next year and beyond, and your business should be ready for it. Now, what I should have said in the introduction is not only have I grown up in a small business family, not only have I run small businesses, for a number of years I've been presenting to groups like yourself around the country. And a couple of years ago, I did some sessions in Cornwall and also in out west, out in Swindon and other areas. And I'd asked for a show of hands of the SME people in the crowd, who here has a website? And only a third of the hands went up. And I thought, I don't understand. Why wouldn't you have a website? So if you're online today and you've been thinking about it, this should give you the push to say you're going to need a digital presence, not just for next year, but going forward. Some other interesting things out of the McKinsey report were that selling needs to adapt to focus on speed, transparency, and expertise. Now, I'm sure all of you have great products, you've got great staff, you've got great websites, but you are going to look very similar to each other when people are looking for those goods and services. So the expertise that you can bring out on social media channels, on podcasts, people will hear about your products and services maybe before they even knew that they needed them. So you can use these digital techniques, and we've heard a number of them this morning from Sean and others about how you can actually get your message out there using digital channels. And the final theme I want to cover from the McKinsey report was really important. Sharing content and insight with buyers builds awareness, establishes thought leadership, forms the foundation of credibility and trust, and solidifies value. So no longer can you expect your digital storefront or your physical storefront to do the selling for you. It will come down to you, the way you appear online, the way your staff appear online, and the way people talk about you online as well. So you should think about that going forward. Now, one interesting thing is with the pandemic and things generally is, what does the workforce of the future look like? We've been stuck at home, many of us, for months. So how does that change things? And what do I see in my work as a futurist going ahead? I picked up this really interesting LinkedIn post from a few months ago from Victoria White. She works at Virgin Atlantic. This is after the first lockdown. You're probably a bit confused because there have been so many different lockdowns. But she was saying, first day back in the office since lockdown, spent 3 hours traveling to work, an hour getting ready, making lunch, packing everything. She missed her daughter. She had a pretty crappy sandwich, didn't eat a dinner with her husband, got home exhausted. The upshot of this post is, why am I doing this? I love the company I'm working for, but I've had a taste of being really efficient using digital technologies. And now I've got to move all the way into work and come back again and go back into that old routine. So what's going to be really interesting is how people actually see that. Because we've been working from home in this global work from home experiment. And I do a lot of these sessions to corporates. I've been doing probably 20 or 30 in the last 8 months or so. And I keep saying, imagine if a year ago, someone had asked you as a manager, can I work from home a few days a week? You would have gone, well, no, it's not the way we work around here. But overnight, I'm sure you and your friends and family have all been sent home. Some of my friends know they're not going back into their office anytime soon, maybe even not until the first half of next year. So this whole experiment has thrown all of our plans into disarray. But it means now that as a workforce, we're able to actually work from home. And we know that that is a way of working. But at some stage, we may want to go back into the office. We want to move from the dining room or the bedroom back into an office. But it may not be the same office we've always been back into, regardless of the size of an organization. And I want to put on the table a concept I like called the third place. This is not new. Howard Schultz, the former CEO of Starbucks, coined this phrase many years ago. He wanted Starbucks to be that third place. And I've got to admit, as a small business person, I've spent my fair share of hours huddled over a laptop looking for a PowerPoint with my third cup of coffee so they don't kick me out in a Starbucks, getting work done. But the third place may not be a Starbucks. It could be a converted library. It could be a supermarket that doesn't need all those aisles anymore. And you might find that in various areas, you can actually come together in a co-working space. It may not even be a WeWork or a Fora or one of those brands. It might be someone else. It might be a council that has set that up. Because people actually want to be able to work from different places and not have to lose all that time traveling. Even here in London, the Westfield at Shepherd's Bush, the old House of Fraser space is being talked about to be converted into a co-working space. I work with a lot of people around my area who might work in Canary Wharf or in Shoreditch, but they live, close to the west part of London. And why don't they all meet as a group when they need to get together and have some face-to-face time and then go back to working from home? So I think we're going to see a hybrid of people who, yes, want to go back to the office we've always been to, some who want to stay at home, and some that will want to go to that third place. And when I talk about the workforce of the future, I think of things as 3 Ps: people, place, and purpose. Now, people, we need great people to do a great job. Place, we've just spoken about, it might be the third place, it might be home, it might actually be at the old office. But back to that LinkedIn post from Victoria about purpose. Why am I going into work? I like work, but why am I going all the way to do that? So I think a lot of people will start, reassessing, what is my purpose? And I've even had some discussions with people about the fact that maybe we won't be in the same job 5 days a week. It might be we want to work 3 days a week in one job and then 2 days somewhere else, or we might want to volunteer. And certainly millennials and Gen Z, their sense of purpose overrides monetary value. So as we move forward and all this is accelerated and we know that we can do things remotely on digital, you need to probably question, what is the purpose of the people that work with me? So as I alluded to at the top, and the McKinsey's survey bears this out, we've got to learn now how to sell through the screen, because it might be going forward, most of our interactions are online. So are we ready for that? Not just in a technical way or having a great website or a fulfillment strategy or an e-commerce platform, but in terms of how we actually go to market, selling to someone through the screen. Because when we're selling through the screen, we're losing some of our senses. We can't smell or touch in a handshake. We can't see the body language as easily across the room of someone that we're trying to sell to or market to or buy from. So how do we realign what we do when we're actually not having all of our senses? But this is an opportunity, a huge one. Obviously, I'm excited and have been for years about the prospect of digital and doing things online. But what the pandemic has shown us, and the comments from people like Ross McEwen have shown us, is that everything is accelerated and you have the opportunity to do this right now. So some things to consider. I talked about this before. Consider your digital first impression. Now, I'm sure some of you before the webinar today saw my name on the agenda and put my name into Google or into LinkedIn. Now, what came up is what I want you to see. I've worked very hard to make sure that my digital first impression is something that explains what I do. And there are very simple ways of doing that. But do you know what your own digital first impression is? Here's a practical way to find out what it is. Now, what you'll need is an incognito or a private browser. If you use your normal browser, all of the searches that you've done before will actually skew the results. So what you want to do is do a search on your brand or your name as if you're a brand new customer. So go to an incognito window or ask a friend or a family member to do this for you. Type in your name or type in your brand and see what comes up. Now, here's one I prepared earlier. I did it for me. I kind of know what we're going to see, but it's interesting if we look at what Google thinks in terms of the authority level around my name. Now, my name is fairly unique, but there are actually 16 Andrew Grills around the world. They do different things. I've actually got a few of them on my LinkedIn profile. Some are lawyers, some are consultants. But when you type my name in, I want you to find me, selfishly. Let's look at the first result that Google propped up. It's my own personal website. I own that website. I fully control the content that's on there, the keywords, the look and the feel. But Google has said the top authority for this person's name is this website, and that's good. That's working well. Secondly, it's interesting, Google now services podcasts. I have a podcast. If you're interested in a good podcast, the Practical Futurist podcast, available on all platforms, is something you might like to listen to. And Google has pulled this and said, well, Andrew has a podcast. We know it's him. We're actually going to present that as well. Now, while you're on podcast, you can also appear on other people's podcasts to get your message out and get that thought leadership out. So think about asking people like me if you'd be able to go on the show. And the third result is very interesting. It's LinkedIn. And we'll talk about LinkedIn in a moment. And that's probably where you're going to go to put my name in to see what I do. And we look at a thing called social proof. Social proof is what happens when you walk past a restaurant, when we could, and there was a line out the front of people trying to get in. But the place next door was empty and they were looking for customers. Why do we line up outside against the one with the line? Social proof tells us that must be a good place if people are waiting to get in. The same thing happens online. So let's look at my LinkedIn profile as an example of how you can actually enhance your own social proof. This is my LinkedIn front page. Where's your eye drawn to? It's drawn to a picture of me on a stage somewhere, actually in Italy last year. And the thing behind me is a huge logo of a company we all know. So the social proof here is, if Andrew was good enough to stand on stage in Stresa, Italy, speaking to a management group at DHL, maybe he can speak to a group of small and medium business owners in Lincolnshire, or speak to Adobe in Australia. So that helps me, and what I'm trying to sell is my services, that you can see that's the digital first impression. Oh, that looks pretty good. The second area you've got somewhere to play with is the headline. And look at what my headline says. It doesn't just say what I do. It says, what do I do and how can I help you? And over the last probably 20 presentations I've done where I've talked about LinkedIn and digital first impressions, I've often been asked to actually do a minute audit of someone's LinkedIn profile. And 9 times out of 10, it says they're a marketing manager, or they're a CEO, or they're a business development manager. That's great. But what do you do and how can you help me? So my call to action, how I can help you, is I help companies navigate this brave new world. So in one look, you've got some social proof. What do I do? How can I help you? That is actually helping to spread the word on your ability and your thought leadership back to the McKinsey report. And you can actually be a LinkedIn rock star. If you delve into your profile, every one of the roles you've got, LinkedIn allows you to add videos, white papers, pictures, photos. So if you look at mine, what I've done against each one of these, I've added some social proof. I'm very proud of my body of work and I want to show that off, and you can do that too. So think at the moment, unless you're looking for a new job, think of LinkedIn as a way to attract clients and prospect for clients by saying, this is what I do and this is how I can help you. And I've done it before and I can do it again. So let's look at how you can actually research prospects using LinkedIn, because again, you want to be able to find out where you might be able to place your goods and services apart from just using your website. And the issue sometimes is, well, do I follow someone on LinkedIn or do I connect with them? And I get asked this all the time. So if I've just met someone, I get a connection request. First of all, who are they and why would I want to connect with them? Because I'm not sure I want them in my network. But LinkedIn, a bit like what you can do on Twitter or Facebook, has a follow button. Sometimes it's buried under more thing. But if you were to follow me, 2 things happen. First of all, you would start to get my content. So you would see the things I'm interested in if you wanted to sell to me. And the second thing is, I'd get a notification that you started following me. Now, because I'm an inquisitive human, I'd go, who is that? And I would look at your profile. And the next day when you contact me, it's a warm lead because I've had a chance to look at you. Oh, I was just looking at your LinkedIn profile. So there are ways you can use LinkedIn to help prospecting as well. But here is a LinkedIn public service announcement. Please, please, please never just connect with someone without giving them some context. Luckily on the desktop, if you hit the connect button, it pops up to say, would you like to leave a note or a message? And here's a real world example. One of the clients, I was having a pre-briefing call before an event, basically here with Adrian. After the call, it'd be great to connect here also. So he will then get a message saying, I want to connect with you and here's the context. That's okay on the desktop, but if you're doing it on the mobile, you need to be a bit careful. If I was just to connect, hit the connect button here with Catherine, she would just get a message saying, I want to join your network. It's the same as me walking into a room, giving you my business card and walking off. Mobile's a bit harder. You have to basically click the more button that I've highlighted there, that then brings up the option to personalize invite. And from personalize invite, you can then actually add your personalized message. Why is that important? This is your digital first impression. This is the first time you've interacted with someone. You've got a chance to say, what do I know and how can I help you? Now, I know there was some sessions this morning about paid content and buying ads, and I would not for a moment suggest that you shouldn't invest money on these platforms for buying ads. But I really believe if you use some of the techniques I've been talking about, that PPC actually isn't as good as great content. I've always said that native content beats paid advertising and will find an audience. And the place to do that is in the LinkedIn status update. The LinkedIn status update you've seen in your feed, you'll have people talking about various things, allows you to put 1,300 characters. It's about 6 paragraphs of text. So you can actually use that to talk about what you're doing or mention someone. And if you attach a photograph or a video with captions, your eye is drawn to that. So you can actually start using this. But here's, again, a bit of a tip for you. Since Microsoft bought LinkedIn some years ago, they've done a lot of work behind the scenes on the algorithm. They're using AI and machine learning to see what people do on LinkedIn. So here's a tip. If you do a status update, that 1,300 character status update, within the first hour that you've posted that, if LinkedIn senses that it's popular because people are liking it and sharing it and commenting on it, it will start boosting it up the algorithm. And I've had content that has been 2 or 3 weeks old that people still comment on because it appears in their feed. So you can actually use this to your advantage and have the digital first impression work really well. Because as I said, I believe that native content will actually beat paid advertising. The other thing you can be doing is actually developing and engaging with your community. It might be that there are specific blogs or forums that you can actually put content onto. One of my clients, Telstra, a large Australian telecommunications company with a footprint in Europe, has set up their own content hubs, lightly branded, but about things that people care about. There's one about the cybersecurity industry. People from that industry will flock there to talk in a very informal way. And you can see what people are talking about, and it's lightly branded. So think about how you might be able to do that as well. But I think it also should learn to become more digitally curious. And that's why I asked those questions at the top of my talk. And there are ways that you can do that. And as Zoe said in her introduction, one of my mantra has been for a long time that to get digital, you need to be digital. Now, I'd like you all to get out your phones because the next slide that I put up is my most photographed slide. I call it the scary slide. Here is a bunch of jargon, buzzwords, terminology. But here's the difference. Everything on this screen will impact your business. I used to say in 18 months. I would now say 8 months. Some of them may know about 5G, that's easy. Some of them you may not. Give you a quick example, deep fake. A deep fake is where you can use AI to have someone appear to be saying the words they're not saying. So I was talking to a friend of mine this morning that works for a big bank, and I was saying, do you know what deep fake is? No. Well, if you're doing a know your customer video chat to check whether I'm who I say I am, and I throw up a deep fake of someone else, I might be able to actually, get something fraudulently. So you should be aware of it. So tonight, tomorrow, next week, take this photograph you've taken, go to Wikipedia or ask someone about what do these terms mean and what do they mean for our business. The other thing you should be thinking about is what I call digital diversity. I'm a huge proponent of all types of diversity, but do you have people on your team that understand the scary slide? They're going to understand what it means for you and for your business and can see things through a digital lens. I'm sure today there's been a lot of talk about agility and being agile, but there's doing agile and there's being agile. This picture I took actually of the people in a scrum meeting. They have a 15-minute stand-up meeting. They talk about what they're doing, what they need help with, and then they get on with it. Now, you might say, Andrew, everything I've talked about this afternoon, there's a lot going on here, there's so many things to do, I can't do them all. I haven't got the people. Actually, you have a couple of tribes in your organization. I call them the 2 tribes. The first tribe, many of you might be represented here today, the going digital. The going digital, you basically are experienced in all these sorts of things. You know how to write board papers, you know how to get RFPs approved, but your digital skills are developing. And then there's the born digital. Their first toy was an iPhone. They live and breathe digital. They know about all the tips and techniques. The 2 tribes need each other. And no matter what size your organization is, if you bring the going digital and the born digital together, you will enable each other to think differently, to be comfortable doing things in a digital way, to understand how people use this terminology and technology. And one of the ways to bring this together is using a thing called a hackathon or a virtual hackathon. You get the 2 tribes together, you give them some business problems. For example, how do we increase and make our digital first impression better? And you can take hours or days to come together and actually understand how you can actually do that. So there's a real world way of doing it. So before I close, in the minute or so I've got left, let me give you 5 practical tips, because as the practical futurist, I want you to leave today's session with things you can be doing today, tomorrow, next week. The first is become digitally curious. Grab that slide you've got a photograph of and play Wikipedia bingo, see which ones you know. Consider your digital first impression. Do that incognito test. Get a friend or family member to see what is your digital first impression and how can you improve it. Please, please, please embrace your LinkedIn profile. It can be the best bit of marketing you never had to pay for. Native content, I think, does beat paid advertising. And go back to my 3 Ps. Think about your people, think about the place they work, and think about the purpose they have of going to work. So what is your personal call to action? What are you going to do? And how do you infect your team to do the same? I'm sure there'll be lots and lots of questions. You can find out more about what I do at futurist.london. As I said, I've got a podcast there. And it's back to Zoe now, and hopefully we've got some questions, queries, or comments.
Thank you, Andrew, for that inspiring and thought-provoking keynote. I'm going to kick off the Q&A with a couple of questions of my own, if that's okay. So the first one is, it's great to see that audiences prefer digital sales, but do you think that audiences are going to crave non-digital more post-COVID, particularly the longer that it goes on for?
Well, I would have said yes a few months ago. And when I was doing some research for another talk and I found this McKinsey report, and there are others that back it up as well, I think people are saying, back to my analogy of, having to spend time doing things in person versus being able to do it digitally may be very helpful. Often I'm asked, well, what about disenfranchising those that aren't as comfortable with digital? And I said this, I was actually asked this on Monday. I think we're doing people a disservice. My parents in Adelaide, mum's 78, dad's 83, they're okay with digital, but they had to start shopping online. And no one had a manual of how you buy from Coles and how you do your order in your shop. And they took to it like ducks to water. So I think sometimes we think people won't be ready for it and they crave that. But it doesn't mean that it's one or the other. There's a hybrid. Those that want a digital channel, make sure it's the best experience you can have. And click and collect. I see so many stores during lockdown here in London that are offering click and collect. I can do part of my transaction online. I can still smile at someone through the window on the wall and grab the garment as well.
It's interesting what you say about the digital divide and people not being as confident with it. I having watched my own mum embrace technology over the last 5 or so years, I do believe that it's a confidence issue, not an inability. And I think that actually it's not overly complicated. I think what stops people from using it is a fear of breaking something, when actually the reality of them breaking something is,
and back to my
common sense is pretty slim.
And back to it being an opportunity, it's forced everyone to go digital. Back to your mum and my parents, they didn't have a choice. They had to learn how to do this. And so they overcame that. And it's that confidence. Now that you've had to do it, it's not so bad. So I think this time will actually be brilliant for all of us, because the 5 years of when it was going to take a while for people to get used to this happened in 5 days.
Yeah. So my next question for you, Andrew, your text-based search results are clearly have a lot of value to you. Do you see that changing with the dawn of things like voice search?
Yeah, voice will be very, very interesting. I think voice is a thing that we haven't thought a lot about. So how can you become voice friendly? How can you make sure that, for example, my podcasts, I'm making sure that there are transcripts there as well. How do I get into Google search engine with voice and video? Because I think video can be very powerful as well. One thing people I don't think understand is that most people watch videos on social media with the sound off. So please, please, please caption your videos. There are a number of services. One is rev.com. The other one is otter.ai that will actually automatically transcribe your videos and give you text, which you can then put onto video. So very simple to do these things. But back to my LinkedIn thing, if you've got my 1,300 word a character status update and there's a video auto playing with a subtitle there, your eye's drawn to that. You actually want to see that.
We've actually found, I don't know what you think, Andrew, but we've actually found that the LinkedIn algorithm tends to favour text-based posts over anything with any media attached.
Yeah, I mean, no one from LinkedIn will actually admit how the algorithm works. So we've all had to sort of work it out as we go along. But the great thing is to experiment. But also remember, people have different learning styles. So some will like to read, some will like to watch, some will like to listen. So again, with your digital strategy, make sure you can appeal to the different styles where people consume content.
And my final question for you, Andrew, what trends do you think have been knocked off course by COVID?
I'll answer that as a negative. The trend to saying we need to test and test and test and pilot. I'm sure before COVID, we had lots of work from home pilots and it was going to take a year and there'd be a study and a time and motion, everything else. And then we just had to do it. I think the barriers to entry have been lowered. So I'm answering it in a negative way in terms of what has been lifted. I think anyone who was thinking, I'm not going to spend that amount of money on digital. Give you an example. I spoke with a company the other week who run events like this, and they said 4 to 5 percentage points they got back by not having to send people out to events and organize them. And that 4 to 5% they've actually put into more digital marketing. So I think things that have been knocked off course are in-person events, but we're still doing hybrid events. We can still do this. I think what we're going to see, though, is an uptick in people wanting to experiment more with different types of digital marketing and selling.
So we have got a question from the audience as well. David James says, there are a lot of people who were pioneers of content marketing, like Joe Polizzi and Brian Clark, who are saying it no longer works and have left the sector. I believe paying to get the right content in front of the right audience is more cost effective than most native content marketing. What are your thoughts?
I actually agree with part of that, but I also agree that great content will find its audience. And yes, well, you've got to push some of that up there sometimes, but it's got to be good content that you're amplifying. In another talk, I talk about large organizations that have eminent people in the organization, the leading cloud security expert. He or she, by having them with their own native content and then allowing it to be pushed up and the algorithm taking hold. So I think you can use both together. But just a PPC paid strategy versus not having great content, I think also is a misnomer. So I think he's right. Content on its own won't work. You sometimes need to boost it. But what I've seen is that great content will find an audience.
Wonderful. Thanks, Andrew. That brings our Q&A session to a close. Thank you for taking the time to share your perspective with us. I'm sure everybody's found it really valuable. And to everyone in the audience, I hope you found that engaging and will start to apply some of that thinking to your own businesses.